In episode 2, we're going to pick up where I left off in episode 1. In episode 1, I started off by telling you about my introduction into body positivity and my journey from there to nudism. In episode 2, we're going to take a while and focus on the community aspect of all of this and really dive deep and explore how finding community and people who would affirm my newfound confidence played a huge role in creating a lasting impact on how I felt about myself. For episode 2, I'm going to have Evan Nix, who is a good friend and a mentor for me in this podcast space. Evan Nix is the host of Naked Age, a podcast about cultural significance of nudity with a background in filmmaking and a passion for naturism. Evan brings a unique perspective to the topic of public and private nudity. He has conducted extensive research and interviews with individuals from various nudist communities to create engaging and informative episodes. In addition to hosting Naked Age, Evan is the director of the Western Nudist Research Library and a contributing producer to the new Nudist Podcast. It's a pleasure to have Evan join me today. Thank you again for tuning in. Bear with me. This is the Bear With Me Podcast, and I'm your host, Jay. And who am I? I'm a 33-year-old black man in America who just happens to be a nudist. My identity as a black man, as a nudist, plays a significant role in how I've come to see the world. I came to find nudism through my journey into body positivity, but we'll get back to that in a sec. Welcome to my world. I think it's critically important to reflect on my journey and nudism up to this point, in order for you all to understand the impact that had on my past and where I'm going. If you've chosen to join me on this journey today, thank you. I truly appreciate it. I promise it'll be worth it. Bear with me. Thank you for joining me today on the Bear With Me Podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and I'm here joined by a good friend to the podcast, Evan Nix. Evan has been my mentor, my guru, my podcast expert behind the boards. Definitely couldn't have made it to this point and without him. So I'm definitely super excited to have Evan join me today. Evan, how you doing?
Thank you, Jay. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Now, thank you for agreeing to do this. I guess, and if we want to take a moment to kind of turn back the hands of time a little bit. Do you remember how we first became connected?
Yes, I do. I think I met you through the ANR PR committee. Is that right?
I believe it is. For those who don't know what ANR is, would you mind sharing with the people what that is?
Happily. The American Association for Nude Recreation is a 94-year-old nonprofit organization that advocates for social nudity and nude recreation and serves as a national sort of representative for nudist interests. And they represent nudist clubs.
Yes, absolutely. So for those of you all who didn't know what that is, now you do. So you kind of know what this episode is going to be about. So yeah, just thinking back how I even got to that meeting. I don't know if you know this. You may know this in some of our conversations in the past, but I was, really kind of getting into the whole like nudist thing, right? And especially like online as far as like, creating profiles, putting up different posts that were really geared towards, highlighting body positivity and talking about nudism from my perspective. And it was Black History Month, actually. So it was during February. And I would see a lot of posts online that were kind of just like colorblind in a sense. And it was coming from, nudists who I felt like were speaking on topics and they really didn't have like the proper context, right?
I've definitely seen that online.
Right. So I went on like this crazy like 2 to 3 day like rant. and I got the attention of Timothy, a mutual friend of ours, and
from Almost Wild is his blog. He's a writer and sort of a nudist figure.
Yes, very popular in this space. So I got his attention, and I think it was through our conversations that it kind of opened me up to like this world that I really had no connection to. I was kind of a part of it, but I hadn't really taken a step towards like leadership. So I had all of these issues and all these problems that I was hearing in nudist spaces, and I really wasn't seeing the community that I had kind of hoped that I would. And so in coming in contact with Timothy brought me into the PR committee, and that's how we connected. But that was really one of the first moments in which I kind of stepped into this space as far as building community amongst other superstars, I guess I would say. So yes, that's how we met. So I remember, I would say maybe a year or two ago, you actually had me on one of your podcasts, right?
That's right. Yeah, we spoke for the new Nudist Podcast, which I'm a co-host and a co-producer of, and I think I quickly saw, first of all, that you were a passionate person, and that it was, yours is a voice that I think the nudist and naturist community really needs to hear. So I think I quickly saw that you had something to offer. So I'm so happy to see that you're starting a podcast.
I mean, Evan, like, this is like years in the making. You know what I mean? I've often struggled with kind of like finding my voice, because like what you just said, I've always known I've had a lot to say, right? But I've never really knew exactly how to go about that. So I've tried blogs, I've tried Twitter, I've tried trying to write books, but podcasting just felt right. And it was actually during that opportunity to be on your show where it actually felt like, it was something that I could achieve, something that I could do. So it's crazy how everything comes around full circle, because as I was starting this and I just happened to put a message out that I was starting a podcast, and you were like the first person to reach out to offer support. So it was only right that I would have you join me as my first guest on the Bear With Me podcast. So thank you again.
Yeah, happily. Thank you for having me. And I'm happy to be able to interview you for your own podcast.
Hey, I appreciate it. So in the first episode, to kind of give you some context about where we're going, in the first episode, I kind of talked a little bit about my early days, how nudism and naturism became a thing for me. And it all started based on some insecurities that I had developed as a young teenager. And so I used that episode to kind of, introduce the world to some of the struggles that I dealt with, and the process that I began to use in order to kind of find myself, if that's possible. Sure. So where I left off, I kind of got to college in that last episode, and that was right around the time that I first got in contact with Timothy. So I figured for episode 2, which is kind of part 2 of the first episode, I figured it may help to kind of tell a story about community and how important developing community is, not only to my journey nudism, but just in having support in general. So yes, I have, I sent you some questions for you to ask. So if you want to, we can go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, even before that, for my own sake. It sounds to me like you were sort of self-aware of what you were trying to do through nudity. Is that fair? Like, were you sort of seeking something?
Yeah, like kind of like what I spoke about during the first episode was basically my insecurities came from my early introduction to pornography.
Yeah.
Right. I was like 10 or 11 years old, and I'm watching these adult actors, performers, I would say, and I was starting to compare myself to what I was seeing on screen. And so that caused me all of a sudden to have this hatred of my body, or I guess, fear of being seen nude. As I got older, I kind of wrestled with that insecurity, but I always knew that I wanted to feel free in my skin, and I was always looking for the right opportunities in which to do that.
Yeah.
And so I knew that my freedom was going to come through, like finally just stripping my clothes off and being naked, whether that meant being naked at home by myself, or what I would later, come to find out that it really helps when you have a supportive community around you who also sees the world the way you do.
Yeah. So what was that first, how did you make the jump? What was that first experience?
It's crazy because the first experience that I had, it actually happened on accident. I was home during the summertime from college. I hadn't yet found a job or anything yet at this point. And so I was just looking to get engaged and connected with community back in St. Louis. For a lot of people who may be listening to this who know me, I went to college across the state in Kansas City. So I spent a lot of my adult life in Kansas City. So upon moving back home to St. Louis, I was just looking for new things to do. The city had changed a lot in the 4 years that I've been gone, so I was really looking for new things to do. And so I created a profile on meetup.com.
Yep, familiar with that.
And then meetup.com is, a website where you can kind of type in anything, any interest that you may have, and they'll connect you with different groups and things happening around the city that pertain to the things that you're searching for. I had developed this newfound interest in body positivity and health, and I heard that yoga was a great way to kind of launch, or a great way to kind of jump into that. So I typed in yoga, and I'm scrolling, I'm looking at the price. I'm a broke college student, and the cheapest class was about $10, and it was on the south side of St. Louis, which is about 15 minutes away from where my apartment was at the time. And so I just clicked onto that profile, and it said it was a yoga class, and it had this asterisk next to it, and it said clothing optional. At the time I thought it was a joke, so I was just whatever. I clicked the link and I paid my $10 and I signed up on the spot. But it was when I actually showed up to the studio that I realized that that asterisk really did mean clothing optional. So that was my first time ever at a clothing optional, nudist friendly event.
Wow, you thought they were just bluffing before?
I had heard about clothing optional experiences and nudism before, but I had never been face to face with anybody. I didn't know anybody in my circles who were nudist. Nobody in my family really ever talked about anything like that. So nudism and clothing optional experiences wasn't really something that I was privy to. It wasn't something that was really present in my world. So I had no reason to really think that people would do stuff like this.
Yeah. So what was that like? It was you walked into the room and everybody was already naked, or what happened?
Okay. So when I walked into the room, actually the lady who greeted me, her name was Amy. If she ever hears this, shout out to Amy. She was the yoga instructor, and she was fully clothed actually. So she greeted me at the door. I checked in, I verified my identity just to be on the safe side. And she told me hey, the studio's around the corner. Once you walk around the room, you can find a spot in the back. The class is getting ready to start. If you have your own equipment, feel free to use it. If you don't, there's a basket with extra mats and blocks. I didn't come with anything because it was my first time. So, right. I was just prepared to walk around the corner and get set up. And then out of nowhere, this guy walks around the corner and he's butt naked. And he's just the most positive and happy person in the world. And he goes to give me I learned why later. Of course, he gets the opportunity to do yoga naked. Why wouldn't you be happy, right? Yeah. But for me, it was oh my God, what's happening right now? right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, what did I get myself into? He goes in for a hug. I kind of give him a what's up, like a head nod and a handshake.
He went full hug first time?
Oh, first time full hug. Like,
wow.
If I could paint a picture of like what he looked like, just like if you ever saw like the old hippie documentaries.
Sure.
Yeah, he was really that. So yeah, I ended up shaking his hand, and he walked me around the corner, and I ended up setting up my mat next to him. And this was the first moment that I can think of that I was ever uncomfortable being in clothes, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me.
Like in this moment, I'm kind of looking around the room, like nobody's really looking at me, but I can feel like, I felt like the attention was on me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're the conspicuous one now.
Exactly. So I had a decision to make, right? Amy's in the front of the room. She's kind of starting off doing some basic stretches, I guess, for her to get ready. And my heart is like pounding out of my chest at this moment. In my head, I'm like, what do I do? Like, am I going to stay clothed, or am I just going to jump in and get naked? For my sake, I just chose to jump right in and get naked. I didn't wear much anyway. I think I had some shorts and a tank top on. So it was very easy to do. What took maybe 10 seconds felt like 5 minutes. But as soon as I got naked, like everybody started clapping. People started coming over, introducing themselves. It was almost like the class couldn't start until I got comfortable.
Wow.
And
this was a group of men and women.
Yeah, it was a co-ed class. It was pretty much even, like 10 men, 10 women. I was the only person of color in the room, which, that led to some other desires as I started to kind of get more active in the nudist community and building community. Yeah. But I had never felt more accepted. I had never felt more seen, supported, and loved. And that was the beginning for me.
Wow. That's amazing. What did that whole experience do for you, longer term?
I think a lot of the things that I was kind of subconscious about, or the things that I was worried about, I realized they really only existed in my head, right? Like nobody that I came in contact with in that class reinforced any of the negative stereotypes that I had in my mind. No one really looked at me in that way at all, right? We didn't spend time having conversations following the session, talking about body parts or what was attractive and what wasn't, or how I look naked, how they look naked. The conversations were really just about like any other regular conversation, honestly. Like when you're trying to get to know a stranger, what are your interests?
Sure.
Where are you from? In St. Louis, we asked this question, like, what high school did you go to? And that conversation really tells a lot about a person based on like what high school they went to. Mm-hmm. So we had that conversation, and then it was in that space that I was invited to hang out with a few people from the class at this kickback that was happening like the next day, and I agreed to go. And as they would say, the rest is history.
This kickback was a naked hangout?
Yes. So this was the first time I'd ever attended like I would say a nudist, naked, everybody's naked kickback, because the yoga class was, it was marketed as being clothing optional. So there were a few people in the class who did choose to remain dressed in some way. But this party that I was invited to, I went in with the understanding, unlike the first time, that, everybody was going to be naked and that I was expected to be naked as well. But I chose to jump head first. That's one thing about me. Anytime I'm curious or interested in something, once it becomes a interest, I jump head first in, and I'm literally addicted to it. And so more so than just being addicted to like the community aspect, I was really just addicted to the feeling of just being comfortable in my skin, because that's something I had never really experienced prior.
Something about being in an environment where this is like in everywhere in life, being nude is this great taboo, right? You'd never be able to just go to a regular party and hang out nude where nobody else was doing it. But you're in an environment where everybody agrees upon walking in the door that that's a societal rule, a taboo, a stigma that just doesn't apply here within these walls, within this time frame, in this space. There is no stigma there, and everybody is allowed to do it and be themselves. And that's a remarkably freeing experience, I can say, from having experienced a little bit of that myself. I don't know if that's how you would summarize it or say it, but
I mean, I think it's an understatement you're kind of selling yourself short here when you say, a little experience, right? I would argue that you have probably the most experience out of any nudist in America, but no, I'm joking.
Well, that's actually not true. I've only been a nudist for like 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's new information.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know based on your involvement in the community. But yeah, I would definitely sum it up that way, right? I think that we tend to exist in society based on a set of rules, right? Mm-hmm. And in naturist spaces or nudist spaces, the rules really aren't that different from rules that we tend to follow in everyday society. The only real difference is there's no requirement to wear clothes. And so it's one thing like when you're the only person, similar like to when I was the only person in the room at the yoga class and I had on clothing, I didn't really, my style of dress at the time didn't coincide with the rules of that space, and I felt uncomfortable. Mm. As soon as I chose to disrobe and join the party, I felt a part of the community, right? And it was the same thing at this party. And I think that's the thing that really makes nudism something that I feel like if more people tried, they would actually love it. Because I think people think about it like, oh, I'm going to be naked, I'm going to be uncomfortable. That's only because you're only thinking about how you may feel in your skin in that moment, opposite to everybody else wearing clothes. But it's not something that people typically notice, I would say, after about 5 minutes of being there. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much the amount of time, I think. I've only been doing this for about 5 years myself. I grew up hearing about it. My great-great-grandfather was a sort of a prominent nudist in the 40s, but nobody else, not his kids and my grandparents and my parents were not. And so I discovered it, very similar to you, probably on not too much longer of a timeline. And I think that's probably one thing you and I have in common. I just sort of jumped headfirst into learning about the history and culture around it and became sort of obsessive about it. But to me, it was that first time was very similar. I was with my wife and my son, who was only, not even a year old at the time. And we went to nudist resort, Glen Eden Sun Club, where they had this research library where I was going to learn about my grandfather. And we took the nude tour, and my wife is not a nudist. She's very much insecure about her body, like many women, and within minutes we were both comfortably naked in this environment with all these other nude people, and it was just this sort of awakening for me.
Oh, wow. I know that had to be an amazing experience. One, that you were able to, do something to kind of connect you to your heritage, right? Connect you with your grandfather, but as well have that experience with your wife and your son.
Yeah, it was wild. And there's a reason that all that confluence of sort of feelings, it all sort of happened around the same time. And I haven't looked back since then.
Well, I'm glad that we've had those experiences. Thinking back, that experience for me happened a little over about 10 years ago. And now 10 years later, we're here on the Bear With Me podcast talking about these things. And so
here we are.
This is really exciting. I really couldn't have dreamed about anything like this a year ago, but I'm definitely excited about this journey and where this is going to take me and how I'm going to be able to use this platform to really bring more people into the conversation. Because my desire with the Bear With Me podcast to kind of take a different turn from like other nudist podcasts that I really hear. This podcast is really more for people who aren't nudist. I actually want to have guests who aren't nudist and talk about things like body positivity, talk about culture,
I love that.
Talk about things like, blackness and how all of those things intersect with nudism. So I'm excited, but I'm definitely excited to continue to use this platform as an opportunity to also share my story, and hoping that although people may not necessarily identify with every aspect of what I'm saying, that they can find a little part of this to make sense to them at least, or something that they can identify with and connect with, and that they'll find their way to love themselves, whether it's nudism, whether it may be, attending clothing optional events, or maybe it's just finding things that they like to do for fun that has nothing to do with nudism at all, but at least that conversation is being sparked, right?
Yeah, that there doesn't have to be an ism to it at all. It could just be a closer relationship with your own body and your own nature,
Exactly, right?
Or
I think
community, like you said.
Exactly. And community, like I said earlier, is critical. Having that. So the first community that I was a part of in St. Louis was called STL Baird.
Baird, like Baird. Bear with me.
Yeah, like Baird. Yeah, BARED. And I was a part of that for a few years. They would do monthly events. And again,
wow.
This is, around 2014. And, again, I was very new to it, but I think, going to events regularly, getting to know the people in the group, people from a million different backgrounds, different faith communities, different ethnicities and racial groups. But it was amazing just how, we found one thing that we all had in common, and how that was the thing that we all used to connect. And I'm still connected to some of those people today.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. I feel like that's common among naturists and stuff like that. And yeah, that's interesting. You had this whole new community, and you'd come from this whole background of having these sort of feelings about your body and nudity that were, mixed up, for lack of a better word. What did this new community do for your own body positivity and your thoughts about your body?
Well, like, I mentioned in the first episode, before I ever went to, any nudist events or the clothing optional yoga, I spent like a year of like isolation. And I spent as much time as I could nude, really with the intent on me finding out, questioning why I felt the way I felt about my body, and dealing with those things behind closed doors. So me kind of jumping out, it's funny how it happened kind of naturally, but me going to that clothing optional yoga class was just like a product of a year's worth of body positivity and self-love practices that I had done, independently. So finding this new community was like a reintroduction to society in a sense, right? It was more like, I'm a social person. I love people. And now I get a chance to, interact with people in a ways that I'm comfortable, in a way that's fun, in a way that's different. It was exciting to try because, again, this is something that many people will never, ever try. There's nude beaches all around America. And when I'm talking to people about it, they have no idea that they exist. Like, I don't understand how friends of mine they go to Miami and they don't go to Hallover Beach.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely been the community aspect that has made this experience what it is. Like, I could have been a nudist and just been at home, but I don't really like being at home a lot. I like to be out in public. I like to hang out with people. I'm always thinking about new ways to engage with people, and to be able to do that, but do that in a way that I'm most comfortable. It's amazing.
Yeah. What have been some of the highlights of these first experiences?
Some of the highlights, like one, I got a chance to experience yoga. I had never, ever experienced yoga. I don't think to this day I've ever done yoga in clothing, to be honest. So
wow.
It's amazing to be able to stretch, and just how your body feels when you're moving and doing positions that stretch you and challenge you, but you're not doing it with the constraints of clothing. One of the highlights is actually like the skinny dipping part of like, I never to this, like right now, it's hard for me to understand swimming trunks.
Yeah, I know
Like
that feeling.
once you've jumped in water and felt like the elements, the wind, the water, whether it's hot or cold, just that experience alone on bare skin has been amazing. It's definitely a highlight. Back in 2017, I actually became a member of the Black Naturist Association, which is a group that falls under the ANR umbrella, but it's a group that's geared towards bring together, nudists who identify as African American. It's not exclusively African American, but with the goal to promote body positivity and nudism amongst Black people. So I found that group back in 2017, and that's been like one of the highlights of my, I would say, typically people hang around people that look like them for the most part, right?
Sure.
And so finding people who look like me and who had similar cultural experiences or had similar backgrounds to how they came to find nudism meant a lot to me, and it currently means a lot to me, and it's something that I'm very excited to be a part of and share with the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, having been in a number of nature spaces that are fairly white. I don't even want to say white because they're always diverse spaces, but like you said, there's a mix of people from all backgrounds that are basically united by a common interest that doesn't necessarily interrelate with other cultural interests or commonalities or other common interests, So yeah, I'm just kind of like, it makes perfect sense to me that finding a space where you've got other commonalities and common interests would be like a level up on normal nudism.
Absolutely. Because,
yeah.
I see this stuff online sometimes, and it depends on how I'm feeling at the moment. I may engage or I may not, but there's this like utopia this utopia idea of nudism that's kind of put out there that to me is like absolutely false. It's this idea that once we take our clothes off, we're all the same, and like
the
just
great leveler.
Right, like being naked is gonna erase like 400 years of of slavery and all the negativity and divisiveness that have happened in our country. All we have to do to fix that is just get naked, and we're gonna be friends and singing Kumbaya around a campfire. And although I would love that, right? Like I wish that people that look like me didn't have to bear the history of, a lot of the trauma that's happened in America. That's not reality, right?
Right.
And so being in spaces like BNA, it just allows me to just be my 100% authentic self around people that I don't necessarily always have to explain myself to. And not saying that's the norm, right? Like I don't go into nudist spaces just happen to explain what it means to be a Black man, but I have been asked like, where are the Black nudists at events? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm standing right here, right? But when I'm with BNA, that conversation doesn't really happen because we all tend to be Black and we're all nudists and so that's been a highlight. I've gone to beaches. I've gone to different resorts here on the East Coast since I've lived here. I went to a BNA is known for vacations and travel experiences. So we rented out this mansion in Florida a few years back. I mean, it had like 26 bedrooms, it had 2 pools. There was a full like bowling alley in the basement, hot tubs, saunas. And I got a chance to stay there for 3 days. Right. And so that was like one of the highlights of my experiences. And also I had the opportunity to take my wife for my 30th birthday. It was during the COVID time. It wasn't really anything to do. Nothing was open during that time. And this is pre-vaccines. So people were like terrified back then, if we can remember and reflect all the way back then.
Wouldn't even like go out of the house still.
I mean, we were afraid to go to Target because if you touched a soda bottle, you could probably catch COVID. So
we were like wiping off our DoorDashes with alcohol wipes. That was us. So when she asked me what I wanted to do for my 30th birthday, I was really terrified to tell her what I wanted to do. But the only thing that I felt comfortable and safe doing was going to a beach. And I had been a nudist for, 8-9 years at this time. So, I mean, if I'm going to a beach, the only beaches that I really
like to frequent are nude beaches. So I waited till about 2 days before we went, and I told her, but she was down with it. She didn't choose to get nude or anything. But she was supportive of me, and so that was also another highlight, which is a kind of a precursor to this podcast that I'm starting, right? Because I believe in the society that we live in, like two things can exist at the same time. Like, friends can be clothed or nude, and it's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can be in a space in whatever form of dress that you choose to be in, and people will still be safe, and there's still going to be respect there. So that's really kind of what her being on the beach with me, and she picked out her bikini and I was naked, and we had a great time, and we laughed about it, and we enjoyed the water, but sharing that experience with her definitely was one of the highlights of my journey thus far.
Wow, that's amazing. So with regards to BNA, you obviously have been more involved with them over the years. You're like an ambassador for them, is that right?
Yeah, so BNA, I think, was founded actually in 2016, 2017. So sometime right around the time that I joined. So I was one of the first 100 members, and I'm still active today in 2024. And as BNA has grown, we have about 360 members worldwide, and we're still growing. Like, a few people actually joined today. Yeah, so as it continues to grow, there's becoming a need just for support and people that kind of help BNA build community. And that's what I get to do as an ambassador. One of my reasons for really desiring to be an ambassador, because, being honest, where I am in life, I really don't have the funds to travel the way that many people in BNA do. But I am a people person, and I love, building community, whether online or in person. And so being an ambassador we had to apply to be an ambassador. I was interviewed for it. We had to do a background check. So it's pretty legit. It's safe, but it's been an amazing opportunity to kind of take the next step and just becoming a leader in a community that I've been a part of for years. And I've also been able to really work with a great and amazing group of people to create opportunities that are, more accessible to all different types of people. So that's something that I'm pretty most proud of.
Man, I think that's like so incredibly important, and something that I feel like all of the clubs and organizations in nudism need guidance on and need like help with. There's a lot of these attitudes in nudism that are, they're obviously, there's a desire to foster a diverse membership and diversity within nudism, but there's like a, like you said, a colorblindness to the realities of what that looks like. There's these, there's the argument that clubs just need to be welcoming, to all people, but they don't necessarily need to create a space for people of color or events for people of color. It's up to just the nude inclined people to put themselves into those spaces. And to me, that fosters a lot of, that doesn't necessarily foster inclusivity and people to want to join up, I don't know. Do you think that's related to what BNA is sort of doing by trying to grow a group that's specifically catered toward people of color?
I mean, I think BNA, and, not that I'm a spokesperson for BNA, but for my personal opinions and thoughts, I would say that BNA exists because certain people just aren't, because of how things are in our country.
Yeah.
Being black in America isn't always the most welcoming experience. And I think what clubs around the country, the world, can benefit from is, figuring out what are those barriers that exist. And in order to do that, you have to take a hard look sometimes at the realities that we live in and actually think through the parts that either, you may have played in some of those things, or just the systems in general and the roles that they play, and creating barriers for others. And it's like, once you can be honest about the things that keep people away, then you can actively start to kind of chip away at those things to really seek the engagement with other communities that you may want. And I think BNA has, was formed to create a space for Black people to experience nudism in a way that was authentic, in a way that was culturally significant, in a way that was engaging and fun. And 360 members later, we're still growing. We do about 2 to 3 major trips a year. I'm currently collaborating with one of the founders of BNA to host a meetup here in the Maryland area. Every year that brings out about 30 to 40 people.
Wow. And where's BNA based?
BNA is all over. There's BNA members everywhere. We have several in California. I run the DMV, like the DC, Maryland, Virginia BNA group on Facebook, and it's like 40 people in that. We have huge populations in Atlanta, Texas, New York. Yeah, so we're all over.
That's awesome. Yeah. I would like to see it keep growing for that reason. It should be all over. I mean, there's no reason why BNA shouldn't be just as big as Anner.
I mean, exactly. I mean, we have members in Guam. We have members in Hawaii. We have members in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have members living in Africa right now. So yeah, that's definitely a goal that I would love to see, achieved at some point. Like, you just point to an area in a map and we can guarantee that there's a BNA community there. Wow.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm curious to know more about Bear With Me. What do you have planned?
Bear With Me. So yes, the Bear With Me podcast, I have a lot of things planned. So one of my goals is just to reach out and talk to different friends of mine, different people out there who have special interests or they're connected to certain communities that may not necessarily be nudist in practice, but some of the same ideals as far as practices about loving yourself, body positivity, and things like of that nature, is having conversations with those people to kind of find out where our chosen passions overlap, right? So coming up, I have a conversation with a friend of mine who uses dance and yoga as a trauma-informed version of therapy. I'm planning an episode with a friend of mine who's a therapist and talk about how the feeling of being free, whether that's nude or clothed or just finding a place that you enjoy going to, like how that benefits your mental health and how your mental health impacts your physical health. I plan on having a conversation with my wife, and ask that question. So I married a nudist. Now what? So for people who find themselves living in a home with somebody who lives a little differently than you, what do you do? How do you navigate those conversations? How do you create a safe space for each other? Right? Similar to when we went to the beach, I didn't force her to get undressed and she didn't force me to keep on clothes. And I think if people really had those conversations in every aspect of their life, I think that there's power in that and there's love in that. So we have a busy schedule. The first season is probably going to be about 6 to 7 episodes. And hopefully this one is a little longer, but they'll hopefully be around 30 minutes. So something that people can listen to on the way to work. I plan to drop maybe every 2 weeks, or, I'm kind of still fleshing some things out.
Sure.
But yes, I'm just really excited to get started, to keep growing, to just experience the growth. I don't really want to overly edit these episodes because I definitely want to look back on after I record my 100th episode and look back on episode 1 or 2 and just kind of see where I've grown. I want to build.
You've done a few of these.
Right. I want to learn more from you. I want to actually be in a position to do what you're doing and how you're supporting me. I want to be able to support others and do the same thing.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to this podcast for sure.
Yes, I'm looking forward to connecting with other podcasters, other nudist podcasters. I'm looking forward to using this platform to connect with other businesses. How do we generate income so that we can create more spaces to help more people find our chosen lifestyle and to love themselves more in the process? I want this podcast to turn into a book series, a YouTube channel. Like, I have so many dreams and goals, and my mantra for 2014 has just been, just to go get it, go do it. Trying not to bite, Nike and just do it, but that's really the mindset behind where I am this year.
Yeah.
And just go for it. Whatever it is that I can dream, I can see it, I can make it happen. And this is step one in that process.
That's great. Well, thanks for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Evan. I really appreciate you again. And of course, we'll continue talking, and I'm sure you'll continue to support the podcast in many ways. I definitely couldn't do this without you. And thank you for joining me for the first episode. This is the Bear With Me podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Thank you for tuning in. Bear with me.